It is it's a special meeting, so I think.
Okay, well then,
We
I will,
have an agenda, don't we?
I don't have one.
We do have the notice.
Yeah, well, I have the notice, that's all. Well then, we will call a meeting to order. We are running a little late, my apologies. And all the stuff that we normally say in front of the meetings, do you want to have any public comment before the meeting? Anybody have any public comment? Okay, then we will.
Roll call. Do we need a roll call?
And we need a roll call. Are you doing that? Roll call. We're three of us are here. I know Councilman Thomas will be here at 1:30.
Councilman Maurer,
Here.
Mayor Breeden,
Here.
and Councilman Sanders.
Here.
Okay. No public comment, so let's begin. Yeah, push it back. Let's begin. Dennis, do you want to get us started, sir?
Okay, let's go ahead and just do a flag salute too, just to,
All right, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for reminding me.
Mr. Cole, would you like to lead us?
Oh, yes.
Please
Please
face
face
the
the
flag
flag and repeat after me. Hand over your heart. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Yes, now, Madam Mayor and members of the council, today we are conducting our wastewater treatment plant workshop. We have with our consulting firm, Provo and Pritchard, we have Terry Shepard, Ken Shuey, and Dawn Marple. We have Terry Schrepner, we have Ken Shuey, and we have Dawn Marple with the firm of Provo and Pritchard, who will be doing the presentation on conducting the workshop, if you will, on the new wastewater treatment plant. I understand the ground rules are as they go through their presentation, they will be entertaining questions from just the council, and at the conclusion of the presentation, they will be fielding any questions from the folks in the audience. And with that, Mr. Schrepner. And I know I always mispronounce your name, so you can correct any mispronunciation I made there.
Okay, yes, the name is Terry Schrepfer, and we got our names up here on the screen here. And just for the audience's information, there are copies of the presentation down here on the table if you'd like to pick one of those up and walk along with us on this. I'm the project manager for the city advisor, new wastewater treatment plant role for the city of Ridgecrest. My colleague, Ken Shuey, Ken, raise your hand, is the assistant project manager, and Dawn Marple is our senior planner, and she is doing the environmental impact report for the project. Another key member of our consulting team is Mark Hildebrand of MWH, or Hawksley Consulting, which is a division of MWH. Mark was unable to attend today, but he is the person that has walked you through and developed the financial plan and the rate studies for this project. And he has provided some input to us for presentation to you today, so we'll have his input as needed. Overview, we did this presentation back in October of this year, and I believe there were 3 members of the council here. This is a repeat of the information that we gave you in October, but there's a little bit of additional information that has been added as well. So I beg your patience if you've already seen this and done that, but there are a couple members here of the public and of the council that maybe have not seen this presentation. So we'll talk about the present conditions at the wastewater treatment facility. We'll look at some of the alternatives that we considered and evaluated in making our recommendations. We'll talk a little bit about the schedule, the current status of the process. And this is a workshop, and so I'd like for it to be 2-way, 3-way, 4-way, 5-way, whatever it needs to be, so that we are answering your questions and we're giving the input that you need to help you make a decision about this project. and then we'll also take some questions and comments from the public. We'd like to, hopefully we will address many of your questions as we go through the presentation here. And Mayor Breeden, just a question for you. How long do we have today? Do we have a time limit, a time schedule? We want to be out of here by 2 o'clock?
Midnight tonight.
Midnight, okay.
I'm being facetious, everybody. We
Well-
want you to cover it adequately and fairly and efficiently, and we want to ask questions that the public does.
All right.
Is there a time frame?
No, when they asked me how long I needed the room, I said it's from 1 o'clock until we conclude.
Fair enough. We'll hang in there as long as you have questions, and we continue to have some answers for you. When we were first engaged by the city to do this project, we were asked to look at 2 site alternatives. One adjacent to the existing site, the existing wastewater plant at the China Lake NAWS site, and then the other site would be on land owned by the city. And the city site's the southerly area in red on the map in front of you, and the U.S. Navy China Lake site is to the north, and that's on the China Lake Naval Air Station Base.
For those of us who, and some of us may not know what the dimensions are, can you tell us what the different, how many feet, miles?
There are approximately 4 miles between the 2 sites.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
And there are interconnecting pipelines right now. One is a sewer that goes from south to north that takes the wastewater from the majority of the city to the Navy site. And then there's an effluent pipeline that goes from north to south that brings effluent back to the city site for disposal.
Thank you.
Your present treatment plant has a 3.6 MGD capacity, million gallons per day. And that is, by your current permit, a maximum day flow. So you cannot exceed 3.6 MGD on any day of the year. We already talked about the location. The process that you have is what I would call advanced primary process. It consists of some pre-screening and grit removal, and then sedimentation, followed by facultative ponds. And right now, its performance generally meets the present permit requirements. You're not in violation of any permit requirements right now, but it's a relatively low-tech, low-performance, but good enough plant for the present. Its condition is generally poor, primarily because it's 50-some years old, so it's seen its better days.
Just a question out of curiosity. What happens if you exceed, currently, if we exceed the 3.6?
If you exceed the 3.6 MGD, you are in technical violation of your permit.
Oh, okay.
If it
But
happens
you don't
once-
shut it off.
What?
You don't shut it off.
No, you don't shut it off. You're in technical violation. And chances are 1 or 2 violations like that wouldn't cause any issue. But if it continued on, the regional board would begin to apply pressure to you to expand your plant.
Okay. And maybe this is a question for you, Des, but how close are we currently to reaching the maximum?
There was a point in time about 10 years ago where we were reaching that threshold, and Lahawton was really on us to make sure that we had that we were working towards a new plant.
Okay.
And partly that was anticipation of the BRAC, the 2005 BRAC, and the numbers that were being thrown out there as far as the potential increase in the population based on where we were with water usage. Now, over the last 10 years, particularly with the drought, the water conservation ordinances, the new mandates by the state, I don't even think we're quite at 2 million gallons a day right now. I don't think we're even averaging that.
Yeah, Mr. Bracken, the wastewater superintendent, tells me it's somewhere between 2.1, 2.2, but that's an average daily flow. There are days which it exceeds that. It probably has max day flow in the range of 2.5 to 2.6 right now. But those days are few and far between.
And in terms of percent, it's when you catch the regional board's eye is when you started getting into the 70% of your design capacity, when you get like, particularly 75%, they'd want you working on a new facility or expanding an existing facility. Well, we've dropped into the 60s now, and we were approaching that 75% capacity number 10 years ago.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So just a few photos for those of you who haven't been out to the Navy site and seen a wastewater plant. This is a photograph of the headworks, which is actually an improvement that the city did to the plant about 10 years ago now. They invested some money and improved the headworks, the screening, grit removal, and some of the front-end hydraulics of the plant. This is a sedimentation basin. This allows gravity settlement of the solids and wastewater. It's just simply removed by gravity and flotation. This is Pond 3. This is the pump that actually takes the water out of the ponds at the Navy site and pumps the water over through the 20-inch effluent pipe over to the city site. Just a single pump. There's a single aerator in the back there. There are over 200 acres of these ponds. This is a digester. The cover of the digester, this is an anaerobic digester that converts some of the organic solids into methane and carbon dioxide, and the methane is flared off. This is a sludge drying bed. It's just, again, the lowest technology out there. You just roll it into a pond and let it sit there and solar dry, and then you let it dry, and then you pick it up and haul it away.
What is the size of that drying bed, approximately?
Oh, gee, what would that be? Maybe about 25 feet wide and maybe 100 feet long, maybe?
Okay. Thank you.
That's an approximate.
I understand.
Yeah. Currently, after the wastewater is treated, you must dispose of the wastewater, and you have a number of different ways that you're doing that right now. First off, the golf course, the China Lake Golf Course, and the Navy have an agreement with the city that requires the city to provide them up to 750 acre-feet of water per year. At the city site, we have sprinkler irrigation of alfalfa, and then the majority of the water actually evaporates and or percolates from the disposal ponds at the NAWS and the city sites. And as I indicated below, there is a way to transfer effluent from the NAWS site to the city site. The other thing of note here, and this is important in the environmental analysis, is that your effluent sustains lark seep, which is on the Navy base, and the Tui chub habitat. And there is a requirement and a priority for maintaining that habitat.
As long as we're talking about that, I've asked this a few times. I don't think I've ever gotten a good answer, probably because I am not asking the right people, but hopefully we've got the right people in the room today. What happens if we don't maintain that? I know we're supposed to. We have an agreement or it's environmental protection, but what happens if it dries up and goes away?
That's a good question. I don't know if anybody really knows the answer to that.
I'm not suggesting we do that, by the way. I do want to know the consequences, though.
I think there'd be drastic consequences.
Tim?
It's a protected species.
Yeah.
So whatever happens when you mess with a protected species, then that would be consequences. I don't really know what that is, but I think
A fine?
There'd be
Yeah,
a fine.
if it's an endangered species, endangered listed species, then there are fines and even jail time, I suppose, for that. But
Right.
I'm not sure it's on the federally endangered list. I think it's on the protected
It's
list.
endangered.
And so it's a high priority to protect its habitat.
And this habitat here, because I got a report here a couple weeks ago at a meeting I went to, they are prospering in this habitat better than any other habitat the Tui chub have.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Again, I'm not suggesting we do anything. I just want to know.
Yeah.
Well, as a point of information, the way I understand it, that particular fish was introduced here. It is not native.
It is not native
Even
here.
though
It was,
it's
it was introduced. Right.
But it likes it here, so.
It likes our sewer water.
Let me just make the point. It's not direct sewer water, it's seepage
I
that,
know.
It's filtered through the ground.
Filtered through the.
Gee, facetiously, if we will let some sewer water go in there, maybe they wouldn't. They wouldn't like it so much.
They might like it even better.
Might like it.
Forget it. Ixnay that.
Just don't transfer any over to the ponds, or then we'll really have a problem.
And the Navy has made it clear to us that in terms of their participation in this project, that maintenance of that habitat is a very, very high priority.
Yes.
Yeah.
Again, another map. I think I just wanted to show here the pipeline connecting the two systems, the two sites. Okay, we have about 186 acres of ponds in use at the NAWS site. That's where a big component of the disposal is evaporation. We've got the China Lake Golf Course, irrigated portions, about 70 acres of land. There are about 10.5 acres of ponds on the city site, and those ponds hold water prior to irrigation of alfalfa. And the alfalfa crop on the center pivot systems are about 33 acres. So that's what you have available right now for
How much water is used on those alfalfa? How much water? How much liquid is used on the alfalfa?
Alfalfa requires about 5 to 6 feet of water per acre, so that's about 180 acre feet or so a year. Does that sound right, Ken? Yeah. And we have water balances in our report that actually lay this down to the tenth of an inch for every possible disposal site.
Okay.
Here's a view of the ponds, percolation evaporation ponds on the Navy site. And ponds 1, 2, 3, and 4 would be considered treatment ponds per se. That's the facultative treatment portion, and the remainder of the ponds are intended primarily for disposal of wastewater. That's the existing condition. And here, it's quite nice out there if you get a chance to go out there and you like fowl and ducks and wildlife. It can be quite scenic out there. This one here is a pond on the city site.
I know a lot of bird watchers will go out there just because it's like the only source of water within
Right.
20 miles. So it's a huge migratory focus for birds.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah.
Good observation. Here's a little photograph of the alfalfa hay operation that the city has. If you are irrigating a crop by regional board regulations, you need to harvest the crop so that you're actually taking the nutrients away from the land. So it's a small hay operation. Okay, on to population and how we get to the flow capacity that we're recommending be established for this project. We start out with the 2010 census. These are hard numbers from the census. Between the city and the NAWS site, about 30,000 people. The 2015 projection is an estimate based on assumed growth rates. We don't have any absolute confirmation of that estimate, but we used the growth projections that were prepared by Kern Council of Governments, that did kind of a regional estimate, and their estimate was a 1.8% annual growth rate. So we start out with the 32,000 that we have now and project forward to the future based on that growth rate. I know there's a lot of discussion among the city staff and the citizens of the city whether Ridgecrest really is growing or is not growing or whatever, and we all have our own personal observations, but we have to use numbers and projections that are not made up by ourselves, but that are made up by organizations that or developed by organizations that have some procedures and demographic experts and so forth. So that's what we used. We used what KernCog said would happen. And I think that's a considerably smaller growth rate than what has been projected in past years. I think we've come to a realistic view that neither Kern County nor the city of Ridgecrest or any place else in here is going to sustain a 2 or 3 or 4% growth rate over time. So 1.8% is a reasonably conservative growth rate. But it doesn't take into account, changes in employment and changes in if the base changes its mission here, and these growth rates just can't project that. We can't predict that, so we don't consider that. In 2015, today, the flow is about 2.2 MGD. We just alluded to that earlier. The 2010 flow, if we go back 5 years, we're up around 2.6 MGD, and this is the average daily flow. So it's dropped off significantly over the last 3 or 4 years, and we attribute that to a couple of things. One, water conservation. There's less water being used inside the home, and I think diligence on the part of the Navy in reducing their water usage, and better plumbing fixtures, or lower water toilets, low flow toilets, and things of that sort. And then I think also the rate increase that Indian Wells Valley had on their water bills has caused the people to conserve. And then, of course, obviously this last year, we've had the state mandated drought restrictions on. So that's why the flow has come back. And we're assuming that flow is elastic, that it might come back up when those restrictions are gone, when the economy is a little bit better, even without any growth. So we think that the 2.2 is just sort of an interim number, and the flow numbers will come back over time. So here's a plot of the population projection, and you can see that the population will double in about 30 years, I guess, or so, if that 1.8% growth rate is sustained. That little dip to the left, up and down, those are plotted from real numbers that we had for Ridgecrest. So the Ridgecrest has seen some bumps up and some bumps down in population over the last 20 years or so. This graph displays the proportion of water that is provided by the city, which is the green lines. This is from 2009 through 2015. And the purple lines are the flow contribution from the Navy. And again, over time, you can see that it was bumping up around 2.6 back in 2009, 2010. And it's closer to that 2.2 or so now. The flow. Yes.
I'm sorry. Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Without doing the math, can you give me the percentage of what the Navy is using as compared to the city?
Yes. Look at your screen.
Next slide.
Thank you. Sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was my next slide here. So, the
Thank
city's
you.
about 70% of the flow, and the Navy's about 30% of the flow. And I looked at that both over the 5-year period and over this last year, and the number was virtually the same, about 30-70 split. And right now, the way the relationship between the city and the NAWS China Lake is that NAWS China Lake is a customer of the city's wastewater utility. And they're just visualize them as another industry in town that gets a water bill and gets a sewer bill. Well, here they're getting a sewer bill, and that sewer bill recovers their full share of the costs of wastewater treatment, including the capital cost. And this was worked into your rate schedule that you adopted in the last couple of years. The Navy pays their full share of both capital and operation and maintenance costs as a customer of the city of Ridgecrest. Okay, how did we develop the capacity of the treatment plant process? So we looked at the base flow would be the highest flow occurring over the last 5 years. And that was a number of about 2.6 to 2.8 million gallons a day. Then we take the population growth of 1.8% per year. Again, that's the current COG number. Keeping in mind that the capacity, we want to build the wastewater plant for at least a 15-year period. So you got a good long run before you have to increase the capacity. So we're looking at least reaching the 2030 time frame with the wastewater plant. And then we looked at the per capita flow contribution based on our long-term 5-year average flow over time, and that number was about 85 gallons per capita per day. So we just simply took the base flow, developed the population growth, the number of people, and multiplied it by the per capita flow, and that gave us a number of about 3.6 MGD average daily flow. Now the plant's going to be designed to, here's the numbers here. You can see how the population increases and how the flow increases over time. The average day, ADMM is the average day maximum month flow. As it turns out, there's always a month or two in the year when the flow is higher than it is during the average part of the year. And maybe it's because there's an influx of people coming into town during the summer or winter, or maybe the base is particularly busy at a certain time of the year, but there's always a time when there's a little more flow each month. So when we apply for a wastewater permit from Lahontan Regional Water Quality Control Board, we're going to say that we want a plant that has a capacity of 3.6 million gallons a day, average daily flow capacity, but we want you to permit it for a 4 MGD average day maximum month capacity. So that if you have those periods of time when the flow is above average, you're not going to get in trouble with the regional board. And we're going to design the plant to treat that capacity. But we're going to use the average annual daily flow for sizing the disposal components of the project. Because the disposal components of the project average out over time. We have storage. We have places to put the water during that higher month flow and to offset the lower flow. Okay, so why do we need a new wastewater treatment plant? Well, I think the easiest answer is that your existing plant is very old. It's seen its better days. It needs some major repairs and upgrades. So if you do nothing, if you decide not to do a wastewater plant, you're going to need to invest money, nevertheless, in improving the existing facility. So it's not a zero or something thing. It's either build a new plant or fix the old plant. We know that the electrical systems don't meet code. We see a lot of corrosion, metallic corrosion, concrete corrosion, spalling. There's a lot of worker safety issues, confined spaces, where it's expensive or costly for workers to enter pits and vaults and things like that because they need to have somebody else standing by with rescue equipment ready to pull them out in case there's some problem there. And so that causes, inefficiencies and extra time to be spent maintaining the plant. And it's just not safe for the current operators. The plant is, if you wanted to add tertiary or recycled water to this existing plant, it's not a very good starting point. It doesn't provide the ability to do denitrification. It doesn't produce a super high quality BOD and TSS, which is a good precursor or treatment qualification for advanced tertiary treatment. So it's not, it's an old, low-tech plant that's seen its age. It's a used car that you've been driving for 300,000 miles, and it's time to, rather than fix the upholstery, it's just time to get a new car. Here's a few photos. Here's some cracks and some concrete there. Some spalling, and you see at the water line there, you've got some concrete corrosion and spalling there. We don't know what we can't see either, but usually the defects are usually sort of at the water line, but there could be defects that we haven't seen because we've not done a full inspection of this plant. The metallic corrosion is obvious on the top of the digesters. That whole mechanism needs to be replaced. Here's an example of a confined space. A ladder, a single operator going down there by himself is just not safe. Doesn't meet current OSHA safety requirements. So there's many reasons why what you have now is just seen its better days, and it's time to move on. Okay, so what we're proposing is that the plant be expanded in 2 phases, and the city requested this. Our focus today is on phase 1, but we wanted to identify a plant and a system that would carry us through 2050 horizon. And what we're proposing is that average annual daily flow in phase 1 of 3.6 MGD with the max month flow of 4 MGD, and that we consider a tertiary treatment system of 1.8 MGD, which is half of the 50% of the average annual daily flow, with that number scalable upwards as demand occurs. The treatment plant in phase 1, there are various components of the treatment plant in phase 1, like the headworks, some of the hydraulic structures, some of the pipelines that would be designed now and built now for the future 2050, because it's just simply a lot cheaper to do it now than to try to come back and do that at a later time. And but other components which can be easily incrementally added, like aeration basins, clarifiers, disposal systems, can be phased in over time. Did you have a question?
I have a question for you. Yeah, the tertiary, so the 1.8 million gallons per day, is that number roughly half simply because that's all you can really recover?
Well, no, we can recover whatever percentage of the flow that we want to recover, but we know that we have some need. Well, we have a flow right now today of 2.2 MGD. So that 1.8 MGD is probably about 80-90% of that number.
Right.
And we know we have some needs for that water, like the Tui Chub and others, that don't require the tertiary treatment.
So you leave that to satisfy those
Right.
needs.
And then there's also, it's not...
but theoretically and practically, you could recover all of it
Absolutely.
had you not had those restraints.
Right.
Okay.
And this is just a target number. We're trying to figure out just exactly what the demand is for the tertiary treatment, and this is a target right now.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Any other questions on this? The other thing that we wanted to do is make it modular. So the 5.4 MGD is another 1.8 increment over the 3.6. So all the units are the same size, the same capacity.
If at some point in time we find that isn't sufficient, and is it made so another modular unit can go on to create additional capacity?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
And our layouts and our preliminary design show how and where those additional units would be installed.
Okay, thank you.
So we've included that in our planning.
What's the maximum number of units you can add before you have to cover the
Well, there's, based on the land that we have available or that we're asking for from the Navy, we can go up to the 5.4 MGD. If we go beyond that, we're going to need a little more land. Yeah. Well, again, the site alternatives, the China Lake, NAWS China Lake site, it's adjacent to the existing wastewater treatment plant and disposal ponds, and it's on an easement granted by the U.S. government through the Navy. The city site is the site of the original, I think it was called Ridgecrest Sanitation District Number 1 site or something like that, and I think this goes back to before the city was incorporated, and that's where the original wastewater plant was. It's on land owned by the city, so there's no land acquisition cost for that project or that site. And the existing, there are existing ponds and the alfalfa irrigation on that site right now.
If at some point in time we are no longer growing alfalfa, how much of the site do we have available for other uses?
I believe the alfalfa irrigation is about 33 acres.
Yeah, you said the 33. The total site then was?
The total site is 200 acres.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
You're talking about the property in San Bernardino as well.
That includes the San Bernardino, yes.
Yes.
There's 50 acres in San Bernardino County.
Okay.
And actually, if you got rid of the alfalfa irrigation, since that's a circle, that's a net area, so you're going to get the square back, so you probably get back 40 acres.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know why I keep showing you this map here, but just again to emphasize the separation of the two sites. The NAWS China Lake site obviously is behind the Navy security system. You have to go through a gate to get there and pass, get an entry permit. The city site is accessible to the public right now, outside the gate. Topographically, the China Lake site, the Navy site, can intercept all flow without any lift stations. Right now, every drop of wastewater in the city of Ridgecrest flows entirely by gravity to the Navy site. And in fact, there's no pumping through the system at all. It flows through the system and into the ponds and out the back door. The only pumping occurs is if you pump it back from the Navy site back to the city site, and then you irrigate the alfalfa. Obviously, it's isolated and secure. It's far distance from any residence, and I don't know how much better security you can get for a wastewater plant than being behind the Navy's security system. Your operators, your vendors, your salesmen, your delivery people, everybody that goes to that plant would have to gain entry through the NAWS security gates. And that usually means some sort of sponsorship by your wastewater plant operator or somebody who else has that authority. I know even when as a consultant to the city, when I go on the gate onto the base, I need to be sponsored by John Bracken, and I have to go through the visitor center and go through that process and get on site. So it's workable, but it's not much fun. You know, it's time lost.
The cost for producing alfalfa and the effects thereof, I know you probably don't know the income from that, or if you do, can you tell me, is there a net gain? And were we not to be producing alfalfa, what is the impact of that?
Well, I think the alfalfa it makes a small amount of revenue. I don't believe it really truly offsets entirely its costs. But as Mr. Bracken has explained, in order to dispose of wastewater on land like that, you have to meet regional board requirements on nutrient application to land. And by planting and crop and harvesting a crop, you are uptaking nitrogen, and you are meeting your nutrient balance requirements. So you have to have some sort of a crop that you can uptake the nutrients. And then he also uses that land for disposal of biosolids, treated biosolids, where, again, the nutrient issue is important as well. So it's a kind of a necessary item, but it's not making you much money.
Is there any other way to accomplish that procedure without growing alfalfa or growing anything in particular? But without that, is there a way to accomplish that and still meet the requirements from Lahontan?
For the sludge, you'd have to haul the sludge off to a landfill.
Okay.
For the effluent, again, recycling, other better uses of the water might be better options.
Okay, thank you.
So we do pump, as Mr. Spear alluded to earlier, when the flows were high in the late 80s and the Lahontan board was on top of you, this new 20-inch pipeline was installed to alleviate that so that the city could offload some of their effluent from the China Lake NAWS base disposal ponds to the city site for additional effluent disposal. So that was a necessary addition to stay within the capacity of the plant.
We were under a cease and desist order in the 80s because the ponds were actually all full. So we had to get rid of the water. That's why we started pumping it back.
Yep.
This site shows you in the greenish yellow little corner there next to the blue is the site of the existing plant at China Lake NAWS. And the blue area is the proposed new easement area for the construction of the new wastewater plant, should it go on the NAWS site. And there have been draft legal descriptions and surveys done to implement this proposed easement transfer, although it hasn't occurred yet. So that site's about, 7 acres or so? 7.5 acres. And that's for the mechanical and the intensity, the structural components of the plant itself, not for disposal.
Has that been submitted to the Navy?
Yes.
And the new plant would use the existing ponds. Is that correct?
Both plants would use the existing ponds to some degree, yes. Here's a layout of the site that would occur if we chose the NAWS site. With one exception, we are going to relocate the tank and the chlorine contact facilities that are in the lower right corner. You see the circle there. We're showing those currently on top of existing Navy facilities that would ultimately be abandoned, and we're going to put them up in above the in the northeast corner of the new site. We're going to rearrange the site plan a little bit so that we're not impacting existing Navy facilities. But this site layout shows the plant for a 5.4 MGD capacity. At the 3.6 MGD average daily flow capacity, we would have 2 of the oxidation ditches, 2 of the clarifiers, and all the other things would be virtually the same or installed now. When you have the need for the 5.4 MGD plant, then you would add the oxidation ditch, that oval-shaped structure, and another clarifier, the circular clarifier, there to the west of the existing facilities. And that expansion can occur whenever the capacity reaches, say, 90% of the capacity, then you'd want to start the construction of these other facilities. But you'd want to have them ready to go to construction, but, you know.
That still meets the 75% Lahontan.
Well, 75% is when they start looking very critically at you to make sure
Okay.
you're in the process of planning a new facility or an expansion of an existing one.
Okay, thank you.
So if you could show Lahontan that you already have the plan in place to put in the next increment, then you can probably stretch that a little bit beyond the 75%.
Thank you.
The city site, in contrast, a couple of the differences in the city site versus the Navy site. It would require a lift station at the NAWS site and a 4-mile force main. And that's because, as I'll show you in another slide here later on, that the city has two sewers that go to the, two interceptor sewers that go to the China Lake NAWS site, wastewater plant site. And one of the southerly sewer goes right by the city site, but the northerly sewer bypasses the current city site and goes straight to the NAWS site. And you would have to intercept that flow and pump it back to the city site if you selected the city site exclusively. You'd also have to do some additional sewer work at California and Lamel Avenue to intercept the existing main trunk sewer that goes east-west along California Avenue. City site also much closer to residents. Obvious advantage, it's very convenient. It would be easy to get to for city and staff and the public, vendors and visitors. Even if you selected the city site, you would still be tied to the Navy site for effluent disposal. And then topographically, the city site is about 70 feet in elevation higher than the NAWS site. So that pumping from the NAWS site back to the city site would have to overcome about 70 feet of static head. So there's an additional pumping cost there. This map illustrates the two sewer service areas. The lower half of the city in the blue flows by gravity right past the city site before it flows north to the NAWS site. The golden color is the area serviced that does not go past the city site, that flows through a separate interceptor to the NAWS site. The flow originating in that yellow golden area would have to be pumped back to the city site if the plant were located there. I might also add or interject here that when we first started this project, the concept was to build a new plant, for the city to build a new plant on the city site and keep the NAWS site ongoing, to keep it functioning for the Navy flow. After some analysis early on in the project, we decided that that was not the best project because for several reasons. One, operating two plants is going to be much more costly than operating a single plant. That there's some economies of scale by having one plant versus two plants, both in construction and in operation. The Lahontan Regional Water Quality Control Board would strongly discourage having two plants in an area that could be served by one plant. And in fact, it was Lahontan that originally forced, I don't know if exactly forced, but strongly encouraged the consolidation of the Navy and the city back 30, 40 years ago, whenever that happened. So we did look at a separate city site and a separate Navy site, and dismissed that as a viable alternative early on. And again, the operations cost alone is what buried that, and then the cost of building and upgrading two plants instead of just one. Here's the city site. The land covered, outlined in the blue boundary, is land owned by the city. The two circles are the center pivot systems for the alfalfa irrigation. And you can see four small ponds there just to the east of that. The dashed line running on the right center of is the Kern County, San Bernardino County line. So the land to the east of that is actually in San Bernardino County.
Can you tell me what the impact of that is? Both politically, economically, what it means?
Well, it is crossing a city boundary, and we notified the County of San Bernardino in the notice of preparation for the EIR, and I believe we got no comment back. Is that? There was no specific comment there. I have no other indication as to whether it's politically a hot button item or not, but from the fact that they didn't comment on the notice of preparation, I see that as a good sign.
Yeah.
It's from an economic point of view, the city already owns the land. I think the city purchased the land with the intent of using it for wastewater disposal, and that's what we would propose to use it for now if we need that land. I think it's from a soils geologic point of view, it's virtually the same as the land on the other side of the line, so there's no difference there. And it is adjacent and close, so there's no extra cost per se to get it there, more so than any other part of the site.
Would we require any additional EIR on that?
No, it'll be covered in the EIR we're doing right now.
Okay. Thank you.
This is the layout of the structural components on the city site. It's got the same components that we had on the Navy site, just rearranged a little bit differently. The city site is not as constrained as the Navy site because we've got a little more land to work with. But that's we got it going back. You can see it's just south of those of the westerly pond. So it's in the center of the pretty much what the city owns there. That land to the that green area to the south east there, that's the cemetery. I think you have your animal control facility out there to the east of the small ponds. You can see the fringe of some residential areas on the left side of the photo there. So there is some residential development nearby. And then there's some rural properties and some various uses out there that you can see.
How close is the residential property to that facility, approximately?
Well, to the border of the property, it's just a few hundred feet to the.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah, to the center of the wastewater plant, which might be the area that's it's considered maybe a larger source of odor. Is probably a couple thousand feet away, but we can get you an exact number on that.
Thank you.
So in terms of site evaluation, we look at both technical aspects, we look at cost, and then we look at non-economic factors. And this is where we need guidance from the City Council, the policymakers here, as to how important these non-economic factors are. I mean, we can tell you the difference in cost between Site A and Site B, or we can tell you which site is preferred from an engineering and topographic point of view. But things like public acceptability, autonomy, if you tie yourself to the Navy site, then you have to. Then you're not completely in control of that particular site. You've got the Navy as your landlord, so to speak, and you have some oversight there. Whereas if it were on your own property, then you could do. Then you'd be. You would provide your own oversight instead of some other agency. So that's a factor. This issue of security. The issue of accessibility. What's it worth to be able to just walk in the gate and not have to go through a security checkpoint every time? There's a little bit of time to be saved there. Probably a small factor in the cost of a contractor to build the plant if he has to go through the security gate checkpoints and so forth. Although I do know that there are pass systems that, you know, once you're in the system, you can get right on. But it's the occasional visitor that's the problem, not the regular visitor.
You talked a little bit about your anonymity and autonomy there. We still have part of it on the Navy no matter what.
That's correct.
So you don't have that totally, only in part.
That's correct.
Is that correct?
That's
okay.
correct.
Plus, excuse me, I think we look at it more as a partnership with the Navy than a landlord-tenant
Yeah.
relationship because we're sharing the plant.
Right.
And it's been working for 40 years. I agree. You got to get a higher base clearance than the normal base to get out there, but it's not insurmountable.
It's not insurmountable, but it is an issue. And you know, if you want to 100% control your destiny, you'd move completely out of the base and build new ponds, and that would be, you know, very costly to duplicate the disposal part of what's out there. And I'm not recommending that, but that's the price you'd have to pay to do that. We also will be looking at environmental factors, and that's that whole evaluation will come out, and then the EIR, the draft EIR, in terms of which site is better from an environmental point of view. And so far, you know, I'll stick my neck out a little bit and say there isn't a significant difference in environmental impacts between the two sites. But Don will get into that more specifically in the EIR. So, and how important each of these factors is to each person is probably different. It is subjective, but that's where we need your input or thought processes. So, in terms of recommendations that we have from a technical point of view, the existing NAWS site ranks higher based on technical and cost analysis. There's about a $6 million difference in cost between the two sites, and that cost is primarily attributed to the 4-mile force main and pump station that you have to install to push the water back to the city site if you select the city site. And there's a few other issues on additional cost factors as well.
So you're saying that putting it on the city property cost about $6 million more than putting it on the NAWS site?
Correct.
I just want to make sure I understood.
Yes. But as I just mentioned in the last slide, you know, I mean, there's other non-monetary factors, and sometimes those are important. The NAWS site obviously is contingent upon a new easement being granted by the Navy, and that process is well along the way. So far, it looks like it's moving forward, and maybe Tim can comment on that.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me okay? So we're in the process of executing the easement right now. I think actually your staff is reviewing the language, and once that's done.
Tim, can you come up here because the people on the that may be watching aren't or recording for later may not be able to hear that. I'm sorry. Yeah.
So, let's see. Okay, so we've been working on the new easement for a little while now, and the way the process starts is we develop the requirements for the easement, and then we send that up to CNIC. That's basically the headquarters, and then they approve the requirements and allow us to start working on the easement. So that part's been done. So we've been authorized to work on the easement. Also, we did put in a funding request. Typically, with easements, the proponent basically pays for the real estate admin fees for our staff to work on the easement, and also for the appraisals and some of the other stuff that has to be done. But we've asked Region to authorize funds to do the administration and also the appraisals. And we have received those funds, and so we're staffed to work on it. Right now, our real estate specialist has shared the actual easement language with your staff, and they're currently reviewing it. And so once we get the okay back from you, we'll be able to move forward. We probably have about realistically around 9 months or so left to actually execute the new easement.
Tim, can you tell me approximately the costs that were absorbed or willing to be funded by the Navy for that procedure?
I don't have the exact cost. I can.
Approximately.
Yeah, I can get you a cost, but I can tell you it's probably approximately in the neighborhood of around $150,000 to $200,000.
Okay, that would go, I would think, when Navy paying its fair share, if indeed the normal procedure is to have us do all that, I would think that would be a factor in the cost of the project that would be eliminated and borne by you.
Sure.
Am I being unfair? I
No.
mean, that isn't normally done. Is that the case?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So when this whole thing first came to light, I think actually it was back in 2011. I was sitting in a council meeting, and the city was talking about this, and I heard someone, I don't remember who it was, but make the statement that the city is not allowing. The Navy is not allowing the city to expand the new plant on base. And, that kind of caught my attention. I thought, well, that sounds pretty weird. So I went back and started kind of checking. And, actually in the easement language, the word replace, along with repair and modernize and all that sort of stuff, is actually in the easement language. So back when the Navy granted the city the easement, they were looking ahead to the time when the plant would actually have to be replaced. So, I talked with the CO and I talked with our environmental department and public works, and no one could come up with a reason why we would have told the city that they couldn't, build a new plant on base. And then, digging a little further, there were actually a couple of pretty good reasons. One being the Tui Chub, and the other being the fact that we use some of the afloat from the golf course for the plant to be on base from the Navy's perspective. And so, given that, we were, able to address our leadership and kind of get everybody on board with the fact that, it would be in the Navy's best interest if possibly the plant would be built on base. And that's why, we were able to fund the real estate fees.
Well, then in addition, Tim, wasn't there an issue about when you actually got involved with your surveying, that there was actually errors in the original easement that had to be corrected?
Yeah, that's true. That's another factor. So when we started looking at the original easement, was done by Navy surveyors, and when we were looking at the original easement, some of the sewer lines are actually outside of the easement area. Back in the day when they did that, you don't have GIS, and you can't, overlay the surveying line work over an aerial photograph. And now that we have that technology, we find all kinds of mistakes in old surveys. And so in granting this this new easement, or this, in granting the new easement, we went back and basically fixed the mistakes in our old document, in the old surveying work, which was another. You're right. That's another factor in why we were able to make the case that the Navy should pay should fund the admin fees for the easement.
Thank you.
Okay.
Dennis, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but he's talking about people wanting to get access to the sewer plant. Have we had any problem with that over the years? I mean, do we really have too many people other than vendors or whatever that need to get out there?
I understand it. Well, it was kind of like Terry had pointed out is just initially, it's the people that come periodically, because once everybody had, well, in fact, that's right. We did have an issue when we were putting in the headworks as we were cleaning that up, because it had to do with, though, the fact that the contractor that got the job, the folks they actually sent to do the work were Canadian citizens. And so that caused a little bit of delay and some problems, but it ended up being worked out.
But we don't get too many members of the public in town that want to go visit the sewer plant.
No, and it can be arranged if there is that need.
If it were more accessible, they might want to come visit.
Wow, I'm surprised.
There are some nice birds out there.
There are. There's also a little bit of an odor out there.
It's true.
And if we moved it to the town, some of those houses close by would be benefiting from that odor, right?
You can smell it on main site sometimes,
Yeah.
certain types of weather. So,
Okay, thank you, Tim. I assume
is that good? Are we-
everybody's got their questions asked of Tim. So obviously, in order to secure financing, you got to have a secure piece of property. So that easement with the Navy is going to be a necessary document to secure financing, whether it's the SRF loan or any kind of a bond. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that the environmental analysis, the EIR, is underway right now, nearing completion. And the EIR is evaluating both sites equally as equal alternatives. And I think that we need to give the environmental review process, we need to complete that before there is a final site, an absolute final site selection made, so that we can consider environmental factors that maybe aren't yet on the table.
What would be the cost of doing the two environmental reviews?
They're being done.
approximately?
They're being done simultaneously right now.
But they're being done simultaneously on two different sites?
No.
and-
There's one EIR document that considers two sites.
Okay, so we're not going to pay for two
No, and it's
okay.
already covered in our contract.
Can I go back when you mentioned about the financing on the bonds, however you do it? Have we worked out the issue of the bond financing, Dennis?
It's still, it depends who you talk to. Because I know the Navy's legal staff has an opinion, and our bond counsel had an opinion, and I do need to check with them again, because they have an opinion that's contrary to the Navy's opinion, but they don't have 100% certainty on their opinion. But they had a person on their staff that's an expert in this that was supposed to get back to us, and I'm glad you reminded me. We haven't heard from that person yet, so I'll make a point of calling.
Also, I'd like to point out that if we do SRF fund loan, which I'll point out soon in our slide presentation, looks like it's a very, very good alternative, and you may not have that issue with the SRF fund.
Okay, thank you.
Now, the SRF fund, as I recall, though, there is a limit as far as how much toward the entire or toward the total cost of the project that they provide.
Well, they have a limited amount of funding that they get as a pool of money every year, but there is no specific project limit. In fact, their website says that projects have been submitted up to $300 million for that fund. And they can do 100% funding, and they can backfill you on your prior committed design or engineering or planning fees. So it looks very good, but it's a process. So
Right, but that's already ongoing. You've already
it is,
submitted
yeah.
the
And I've got a couple of slides here that'll show us where we're at on that. So when we looked at treatment alternatives, this is kind of the technical side of the project here. You know, what kind of system do you use to do secondary treatment? What kind of systems do you use for primary or for tertiary treatment? And a couple of caveats. All the treatment processes that we considered include biological nitrogen removal, and all included aerobic digestion with mechanical dewatering of biosolids. So those weren't differentiators in the processes. And biological nitrogen removal has become sort of a de facto standard anytime you are disposing of wastewater effluent to land because of the potential for nitrate pollution. And the biological nitrogen removal brings the nitrogen levels down to a point where they're below drinking water standards. So your impacts on groundwater are minimized with biological nitrogen removal. And it's also a very inexpensive process in that you build your basins a little bit larger to create what they call an anoxic zone, which is a zone without oxygen. But other than the extra size of the reactor, of the vessel, there's no additional cost to that. And in fact, it reduces your oxygen requirements so you have less aeration on the rest of your system. So so for a small capital cost investment, you get operating cost savings with biological nitrogen removal. So on any new plant that is designed now, my recommendation is that you include that because it's so easy to do at the very beginning. It's much harder to come back after the fact and try to do it. So we looked at conventional activated sludge, oxidation ditch, which is also an activated sludge process, SBR, which is sequencing batch reactor, and biolac, which is an activated sludge system in a pond. And after our analysis, we selected the oxidation ditch, which is that oval-shaped system that we showed on the site plan. It had the lowest life cycle cost, and life cycle cost includes both capital and operating costs. It's operator-friendly. They're very common in California. It will be easier to recruit and retain an operator that knows how to operate a oxidation ditch here in Ridgecrest than maybe some of the other processes. Produces very good quality. The nutrient removal process is easily accommodated in the oxidation ditch. And there's more technical discussion of that in our facilities planning study, but that's our recommendation. Disposal alternatives, that's a little tougher part of our project here. We got 3.6 million gallons a day that we need to show the regional board that we can dispose of or reuse in a sustainable and environmentally safe way. So our options are recycle water, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. We have the existing disposal ponds. We can irrigate a crop like the alfalfa that you're irrigating. In disposal ponds, there's two components of where the water goes. It either percolates into the groundwater table or it evaporates. Evaporation is not the best use of water here because once water is evaporated, it's not recoverable. It's not useful. It doesn't contribute to your water balance, so we try to avoid that if we can. Okay, so for this project here, the baseline project, which is the secondary treatment process, not including tertiary, we need to demonstrate through a water balance that we can dispose of all the water. And so we need 56 acres of new effluent ponds, and in addition to what we already have, in addition to the existing ponds, and in addition to the golf course irrigation, and in addition to the alfalfa irrigation. If we go up to 5.4 MGD, we need more land. Now, the beauty of land disposal is that disposal sites can be added incrementally. You don't have to have it all in place right now. Maybe by the time you reach 5.4 MGD, your recycled water system will be so large that you won't even need to look for any more land. So we've been trying to set the stage for developing a sort of a starter recycled water system. And we're talking to various users or potential users. We've talked to the Navy. We've talked to Indian Wells Valley Water District. There are a few others on our list to talk to. County of Kern, Parks, the school district for school playground and athletic field irrigation. There was an old project that, it at least ought to be mentioned, although I don't know if it would be seriously considered, is Cyril's Minerals takes water from this area and runs water down a couple of pipelines into some boilers. If we could offset that use with treated effluent water rather than groundwater, that might be some advantage, but it's a long ways away.
What about the Desert Empire Fairgrounds? They have trees that they water and may be interested in putting in other, have you talked to them?
We have not yet talked to them. We will put them on our list.
Okay, there's the man you need to talk to.
All right.
Now, I've got a question here. Right now, we're approved for 3.6, but you're saying in order to be approved again, we need additional 56 acres more than we have now? Am I understanding that correct?
Well, that's mostly correct. I would say that the 3.6 mg is not your average flow. Your average flow now is probably, or the permit, if you had a 3.6 mgd
That's
peak
max.
flow.
So this would be a 3.6 average flow, not a max flow?
Right.
Okay. Because a lot of the ponds are dry right now, or
Right.
mostly dry.
Yeah, but right now you're at 2.2 mgd.
Right.
And that would explain why they're dry.
Seems
right
to me when I was out there, there's almost half the ponds are dry.
now. Yeah. Again, those 56 acres of wet ponds would go on the city site. If we built the secondary treatment plant, we did not have a recycled water system. Virtually all the area would be, there's a portion of the San Bernardino site that's not. The upper half of the San Bernardino site's land would not be in ponds, but the rest of the site would be in ponds. And that shows in our 30% plan submittal, exactly the layout of those ponds.
So you're saying that if we do not recycle water,
You don't recycle any more water than what's currently being recycled.
Okay.
You would need to build 56 acres of ponds
Okay.
on this site.
Okay.
To the extent that we can offset and have recycled water, then there would be proportionally less.
Gotcha.
So in terms of developing a recycled water project, this is kind of the model that we're using in terms of our thinking. And kind of the overall thinking is that the greatest benefit to the Indian Wells Valley Basin occurs if recycled water is used to offset current groundwater pumping. So as opposed to irrigating newly developed land with recycled water. If we're irrigating a park with pumped groundwater and now we're irrigating it with effluent, now we can leave that water in the ground and it can stay in reserve in the ground. If we go out and buy new desert land and start irrigating it, well, we just created a new use for the water. So that's the greatest benefit that would occur is if we can offset existing groundwater pumping.
But you're also talking about a pretty good expense.
Yes, sir.
Because you got to run a pipeline.
You got to run a pipe, you got to do the extra treatment, and there is a significant additional cost to do that. But we're next bullet down here. We recognize that recycled water has value, and that the city, if we develop a recycled water system, the city's going to try to sell that water to potential users at a market rate that will at least offset the delta cost of treatment. So if it's costing you $500 an acre foot to treat the water, well, you want to recover $500 an acre foot, but that might not be the market rate that you can sell the water for, so you might have to take a loss on that water. Because that price of that potable or that recycled water has to be competitive to potable water supply, because why would you want to use recycled wastewater if you can pump groundwater for the same cost? So you'd have to market that water at a price maybe 75%, 80%, or two-thirds or something of the cost of potable water, so that there's an incentive to use it.
Do you have an opinion on approximately what that water cost is going to be to sell recycled water?
Yeah, we do have a number, and it's between $1 and $1.50 per 100 cubic feet. And that would recover the full capital cost of the water. But you'd have to sell all of the water to.
Can you give me that in acre feet?
It's about $600 an acre foot.
Right now, water, in a meeting I was in not too long ago, was talking about the going market rate for water was between $1,000 and $1,500 an acre foot, and there was some as high as significantly higher than that.
That's incremental water.
That's right.
Yeah.
It is. It is.
Yeah. So this could be competitive to that, but it's not competitive to turning on the pump and pumping water out of the ground right now. Yeah. And it probably never will be, but
If we have that water to pump out of the ground.
if you have the water to pump.
Yeah.
So the other part of the model is that so that there's no restrictions on where the water could be used, we would treat it to the highest Title 22 standard, which is tertiary 2.2 disinfected wastewater, and that water can be used unrestricted anywhere. School playgrounds, school yards, playgrounds, crop irrigation, you name it. It has no restrictions if it meets that criteria.
Does that include potable standards?
No, you couldn't put it in a potable water pipe.
Okay.
It's not.
Is
that's
that a
not
further
directly
level
used.
of treatment
Yeah.
then?
And that's being worked on, but it's just not the level of scrutiny that you would get to propose a project like that would be way beyond what could be reasonably considered for a small community like Ridgecrest to carry on. So,
Well, in fact, we are going to have that discussion in 2 weeks with Lawton.
yeah, exactly.
The cost of injecting that water that might have come out of the aqueduct would be injected, or the potential was for Department of Water, LA Department of Water, of injecting water out of the aqueduct into areas in the north part of the valley, and then later pumped up at half of what they put in. It seems to me if we injected that water, we would have potable water after a time. Am I not understanding that correctly? I'm just asking the question in theory.
Yes, indirect potable, indirect injection of water and then pumping it out is a viable method of enhancing your water supply. The water needs to reside in the groundwater table
That's right.
for, I think, a 6-month period.
Exactly.
You have to use, there's an extensive process in proving out that time frame, and involves tracer studies. It involves a myriad of technical studies. It involves a lot of testing. It's possible, but it might be easier if you can irrigate a park with water that's currently being pumped.
agree. I
It becomes a
understand.
better deal than
The dollars.
doing that.
Yep.
We also talked to Indian Wells Valley, and the best places, their well field are quite some distance from here too. So getting the water out there is a overwhelming cost in and of itself, which makes it less feasible. But we have considered that option.
Question here. Could you explain to the proposed investors that aren't real familiar with Title 22 quality, what level of metals and possibly personal care products might be involved in those contaminants in that Title 22 level?
The Title 22 regulations themselves don't speak directly to the metals content, but the waste discharge permit that is issued can and probably will. Typically, the metals would be limited to at or below the maximum contaminant level for drinking water. And on the personal care products, That's an emerging issue that there are standards for certain organics in the water, but they're not that specific yet.
We did ask the public to hold off, and I appreciate the question. I'm not trying to criticize, but if we did ask the public to hold off until we got through, and then save your questions, write them down, ask them, because we really want to be able to answer them and have them asked. Sorry. Thank you.
Benefits of recycled water, I think you all know the answer. This sustainability, possible lower costs and incremental water supply that Mayor Breeden just alluded to in her discussion. There is a state policy that encourages recycling. Recycled water is easily scalable. We can build a starter distribution system. We can add to that. We can add capacity. We can add pumping. It can generate revenue, and the goal would be to offset all the costs, but if it can't offset all the costs, it can offset some of the costs. And then you'd have the opportunity to have more green stuff in Ridgecrest if you could make this happen. It seems like a win-win if we could just overcome the issue of how you fund it and recover your costs. Recycled water treatment, as I said, the way we have the system designed, we would build the secondary wastewater plant as the base case, and we would add capacity. We would add the tertiary recycle treatment on the back end of that secondary plant. And we're proposing, and this is an elastic number. It can be whatever the number works out to be, but we're talking about doing a 1.8 million gallon per day starter capacity, which is about 50% of the existing capacity. Using cloth filters, proven technology, and approved by CDPH and the Division of Drinking Water for Title 22 compliance. Disinfection, we're proposing chlorination. Adding a 1.8 million gallon storage tank, because we assume that most of the recycled water may be used at nighttime rather than during the daytime, because it's a little more efficient to irrigate at night than in the daytime, particularly in the summertime or when the wind's blowing. We'd have a booster pumping system and a starter purple pipe distribution system. Possible uses, the China Lake Golf Course, that's a given. The Navy wants to continue to use water for the golf course irrigation, and we're in some early discussions about the possibility of the city taking over the treatment part. Right now the Navy treats their own water before applying it to the golf course. We think that it may be possible for the city, because of the new technology and the new treatment plant, to treat the water to a higher level and reduce chemical costs considerably, and maybe be able to provide that water to the Navy at a lower cost. And we're working on that now.
Is that because of the increased factor of water? You got to do it anyhow. It's no more water. More water doesn't cost a whole lot more than doing it anyhow.
That's part of it. The other part of it is right now the Navy takes the water after it's been discharged to the ponds, and in those ponds algae grows and the solids regrow, and it just consumes chlorine, an enormous amount of chlorine, because of the algae in the water. And if we can treat it and get it to the Navy, filter it and chlorinate it, and then give it to the Navy, the chlorine costs will be considerably less. And then they'll have filtered water, and then they could also have unrestricted access to the golf course, because right now I think they're required to, they treat it to a slightly lower standard and are required to irrigate at night. And with this water, they could irrigate in the day, the night, or whenever. We looked at, we already mentioned the parks and school athletic fields. We asked about whether NAWS was interested in turf and other irrigated areas, and right now we don't think that's feasible. We've already talked about treatment processes here. Well, I just mentioned this about using the recycled water at the golf course in lieu of existing chlorination facilities, if costs are competitive. This is a map showing what I'm characterizing as the starter purple pipe distribution system. As you know, purple pipe is the designated color for distribution of recycled wastewater. And so we made the pipe purple in the photo here. But lower left corner, that's City Hall right here. And I know you have your own well. So that's kind of the end of the line. And it works its way up back along French Avenue, Petroglyph Park, several of the parks along the way, Burroughs High School, the new elementary school are all sort of in a nice, fairly compact pattern along there. The city could build a purple pipe distribution system and make this recycled water available to these various green areas. And then in the long-term future, maybe when new development occurs, maybe you have them put in a dual water distribution system so they can connect to the purple pipe system. Maybe we expand this system beyond. It's just like a water distribution system. You can interconnect and grid it and take it wherever it needs to go. But these, to us, were the obvious sort of first cut possible users of recycled wastewater. And each individual owner or operator of these parks or schools would have to have some investment in backflow prevention and cross connection, because the water system would need to be, the recycled purple pipe water system would need to be completely separate from any kind of a potable water system. So there would be some additional costs on the part of the individual users to make sure that occurs.
I'm thinking for, like the school district in particular, are you aware of any grants or something that they would be able to access to help with those costs? Or?
Well, I do know that there's recycled water grants available from the state SR, at the same fund that we're talking about funding the secondary part of the plant. And my recommendation is that the city have the wastewater plant and the tertiary plant as separate projects and apply for a recycled water grant under the tertiary component to pay for the purple pipe and the additional treatment. And the beauty of that, the money that's available right now, is there's a possibility of a 35% grant and then the possibility of a 1% loan for that part of the project. It may be possible for the individual school districts and parks people to apply also for that money to get the connection money included. So that, that's promising. The state is strongly encouraging recycling water, and any water that you recycle doesn't count against you or is in your favor in terms of your water balances.
The matching funds for that, are there any?
Possible 35% grant.
But no matching funds?
Well,
You'd have to, you'd have to get the difference between that and 100%.
Yeah,
but still,
65% would be
your matching funds.
Right.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood that.
Yeah. So costs, this is what everybody's interested in, the various projects. In a nutshell, the NAWS site cost, secondary treatment, $44 million. That's the base project, no tertiary. Okay, the city site, about $50 million. And the major difference in those costs, again, are the force main, the 4-mile-long force main and pump station, and some sewer work that you wouldn't have on the NAWS site. And then the recycled water, about $8.2 million. Its cost includes the purple pipe distribution, but not on-site costs. And again, the potential for that grant and loan there that's hanging out there. And to recover that $8.2 million, that's that $1 to $1.50 and 100 cubic foot that I was speaking of.
Would that grant be applicable to the cost of the whole plant, the treatment plant?
It'd be the recycled water grant would be applicable to this segment here, this $8.2 million.
Oh, okay, fantastic. Yeah.
There is no grant per se available except for disadvantaged communities for the treatment plant portion of the project.
Okay, gotcha.
Then when it's time to expand the plant to the 5.4 MGD, at either side, it's another $12 million. We're not considering that as a factor in current financing. That's a decision that a future council will make probably 12, 15 years from now. Operating and maintenance costs. Secondary treatment and collection system. My understanding is that your current costs are about $900,000 a year. That cost with the new plant would go up to about $1.5 million total. And one of the big changes in that is cost of electricity. There are a lot more mechanical components, primarily aeration and mixing, that you don't have with your current plant. The annual cost for tertiary treatment, about $384,000 if you produce all the water. If you produce less water, the cost will go down, because a lot of that cost is chlorine, chemical costs. Okay, recommendations. New plant to replace the present facility, 3.6 MGD located at the NAWS site. We're using oxidation ditch with disposal, golf course. Alfalfa irrigation, continue to use that. Disposal ponds, new and existing. And then the amount of recycled water, we need to hone that down to a number based on interest. And we're working on that right now. But to the extent that you recycle water, that disposal pond number becomes smaller. The amount of disposal ponds needed becomes smaller. So that could actually offset a little bit of that $8.2 million cost. So upcoming actions. We're working on the EIR. We're talking with the Navy. We're talking with recycled water users. We are coming to the close of what I'm calling the preliminary design and planning phase of the project, environmental phase. The next phase will be final design. That needs to be authorized. Apply for waste discharge permit. So we're meeting with LaHontan in a week and a half. Develop and implement a financing plan and complete the Clean Water SRF loan fund application. So status with the Navy, Tim gave us a pretty good overview of that. The easement's been prepared. And one thing I wanted to emphasize is that there was an issue raised about the Navy property reverting back to the BLM and so on and so forth, and what does that do to the validity of the easement? Well, in reading the easement language, the grant will be from the United States of America, acting through the Secretary of the Navy. So the easement would be granted by the United States of America. So I don't think it matters whether it's the Bureau of Reclamation or the BLM or the Navy. Navy's been on board with us for a long time. They have copies and have reviewed the 30% plans. As part of our environmental process, the Navy will be completing a parallel NEPA process. And we've met with the Navy on recycled water use.
The NEPA process, how does that impact us if the Navy is doing it? Is it things that, Tim, you will have to do, things we have to do, cost borne by you, by us? What is that? I mean, I know what a NEPA evaluation is, but.
Right. I am not really dialed in.
Okay.
Yeah, I think in a few minutes we'll have Dawn get up here and give you an update. And I think she can probably explain it better than I can.
Okay.
But
thank
it's
you.
my understanding it's a parallel process that the Navy has to or wants to do their own process in parallel to what we are doing. The city's doing all the technical studies and is doing the CEQA, California Environmental Quality Act compliance, but the feds do a parallel process for NEPA.
Okay. Thank you.
SRF loan application, this council has already approved and authorized City Manager Dennis Spear to be the signatory on the application. We have the general information package ready for submittal with a couple of I's to dot and T's to cross on a couple of boxes. It'll help the city get some extra points. There are 3 packages that go with the SRF loan application. The environmental package is one of them, and that's considered to be the most critical and the longest lead time. But that really can't be submitted until we finished our environmental process. So that's a critical path there. There's a technical package that we need ultimately to say where our site's going to be. And a financial security package which we will work with the city and Mark Hildebrand on, and that's in preparation. As I noted earlier today, I think the water recycling ought to be submitted as a separate grant application. Lahontan Regional Water Board, as you know, they are the agency that will permit the wastewater treatment plant. We've been talking to Lahontan all along the way, but we're trying to kick it up a notch here, and City Manager Spear, John Bracken, and I have a meeting set for them in a week and a half or so. We're going to go down to Victorville and make sure they're on board with what we're doing. And the regional board already knows about the project. They have responded to our notice of preparation, and we are addressing their comments in the EIR. Schedule from this point forward. We have in our workshop today, site selection after the EIR review. These are just suggested dates. Authorized final design maybe in June. Application for the CWSRF maybe in March. Certify the EIR in spring this year. Prepare report of waste discharge, and we really can't do that until we know what the site is. Final design 2017 maybe. Bids maybe 2017, construction starting in 2018, and completing construction just about 2 years later in December 2019, and the grand opening in January 2020. So that's the schedule as we envision it now. That's flexible, but that's also, I think, a doable schedule. So asked Mark at Hoxley Consulting to give us some financing alternatives, and he has prepared a memo on this just so you know what your options are. General obligation bonds, they require a 2/3 vote. Probably not the best idea, but they have relatively low interest rates, 20 to 30-year terms. Revenue bonds, you would pledge the revenue from your wastewater enterprise fund to the bond repayment. Typically a little shorter term and a little higher interest rates than general obligation bonds, but they do not require voter approval. They would require approval of this city council. The Clean Water SRF funds, 20 to 30-year terms are available. Their interest rates are 1/2 of the going rate for a general obligation bond at the state level. And so right now, the recent interest is around 2.25% or so. 100% financing is available. Downside is you got to go through their process, but there's funds available. You just got to get in line and just start going through the hoops to get that money.
Does that process add more to the time frame that you gave us?
Should not. Well,
can it be done in conjunction?
There's a lot of
with
it that's done in parallel here.
Yeah.
But the financing plan that's been developed, there's a lot of progress you can make before you start spending the real dollars on this system. Your current wastewater rates were set up to develop reserves early on in the process so that you can meet your design and other planning cash flow issues before you start spending the real money, which occurs in 2018 when the construction starts. Okay, on the financing, as you know, you went through a rate increase a couple of years ago, and you established rates. I had Hawksley Consulting relook at those rates in light of our current proposals, and their conclusion is that the current rates in place right now, with the rate increases that have already been built in, will support the $44 million capital expenditure and future O&M costs. So it can support basically the city site. If you wish to use it'll support, the 44 million supports the NAWS site. If you wanted to go to the city site, you would have to increase rates. And sort of rough numbers, you'd have to increase rates about 5% in 2017, 6% in 2018, and 10% in 2019, and 3% thereafter. So there would be some additional cost, ratepayer cost, to go to the higher cost project. Right now, it looks to me and I'm not a financial person, I'm an engineer, but I like the looks of the SRF very much. The low interest rates, the flexibility. It's designed to fund wastewater treatment plants. That's what it's there for. I think you can get through the hoops. I mean, they're kind of a pain, but we can get through them. And I think the issue of the tax-free municipal bonds, that the restrictions you may have that we can't get the definitive answer to may not occur with the SRF funding as well. So that issue probably goes away. But again, we are not experts, and Hawksley are not municipal financial advisors. We don't have any fiduciary responsibility. We're not qualified to do that. So we would recommend that you consult with the municipal financial advisor regarding this issue before you make your decision on how that's to be funded. What else? Oh, and so let me add also, I didn't have a slide for this, but if the tertiary treatment plant, if you were to fund it out of pocket without offsetting revenue from water sales, you would have to raise rates about 8% in year one, 10% in year two, 12% in year three, and 3% thereafter. So its feasibility is really dependent largely on the ability to get offsetting revenue for the water that you're producing.
That doesn't.
Go ahead. No, I was just saying, is there any council comment, questions?
The increased rate plan for the tertiary treatment addition.
Yes.
Is that considering us not getting the 35% grant?
That's correct. That does
okay.
not. That's worst case scenario. You do not get the grant, and you don't have a 1% loan.
Gotcha.
And also, those rate increases were assuming the bond financing.
Not
if you get SRF financing, they would be much. It would be a different scenario.
Yeah,
It'd be
the
lower.
underlying interest rate assumption on the scenario that Mark Hildebrand prepared was a 5% interest rate on a GO bond, and that has a higher debt service ratio. I think it was 1.5 to 1 versus the SRF funding, which only required 1.1 to 1 debt coverage. So it's more attractive in that sense as well.
Fantastic.
And before we, since this says questions and discussion, I'd like to invite Don up here to give us a little update on the environmental process, what's ahead of us, and where we're going on that before we get into a little more questions and discussion.
Good afternoon, council members. We are almost at the end of drafting our EIR process, our EIR document, including technical studies for biological and cultural resources and air quality. So those reports will be done to kind of answer the NEPA questions that came about. Those reports will be done and suffice the federal level requirements. So as far as, I guess, the question from Mayor Breeden was, who's footing the bill? The city is completing the California Environmental Quality Act process, but they are doing the studies at a federal level so that the Navy can then utilize our studies and our EIR document to complete their NEPA documentation for any federal actions that they have to take on their part. So your CEQA document will cover all of your public actions on the project, and their NEPA document will cover all their federal actions they have to take on the project. So we're looking at completing that here within the next couple of weeks, the draft. The city will then review that, and then we will go out for a 45-day public review process of that document. So the public will have 45 days to comment on that document, and then at the close of that, we will assist the city in answering any questions that or comment letters that come in, and then upon the completion of answering all of those questions, then you will see that before you for your adoption and certification of the environmental impact report. So that's kind of where we are right now on the environmental process, and I hope I answered any of the federal questions. In our meetings that we've had with the Navy in the past, they just said that they would utilize our report to finish their NEPA process and their federal actions. So,
Is there any other council comment, questions? Okay, then, we're going to open it up to the public. I appreciate you all holding your questions till now. Come on up and ask them, please.
Stan Torah. Good afternoon. My feeling is we need to be looking at a long-term solution. And there are a number of things that we need to be looking at. One of those is the location. I understand there are advantages to the current site. However, there's nothing that I've heard that gives me the warm feeling that we have the control over the expansion capability that we're going to need in possibly 50 or 60 years. Who knows what's going to happen? If our town actually grows, we're going to need to expand for sure. I'm just not convinced that not having the land under our control and the ability to access it is the right way to go. And there's nothing that I've heard to date that actually answers the question in my mind. I had sent some information in regarding capacity requirements earlier. I believe we're at 2.1 million gallons per day, something like that for the average flow. And I believe that's been going down for like 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. Based upon the fact that we are being required to have a 36% decrease in water use in our valley, or at least in our water district, my feeling is that that 2.1, at least the water district side of that, which I believe is like 1.4, is going to be going down further. One of the things that has been assumed in this particular study is that we have a 1.8% growth rate. And I understand why the number was used. Unfortunately, according to city numbers, at least from Cosmont, there has been from 2010 to 2015 absolutely no growth. Well, 20 people, is what they're estimating. And also, according to Cosmont, the growth for the next 5 years is going to be 0.37%, which is obviously a lot less than 1.8. So I would suggest that a good deal of the numbers that you see in this report are way overboard. Nothing at all like reality. And as a matter of fact, if we don't see some economic development very, very soon, our growth rates, I don't think, are going to meet even the 0.39% that Cosmont has 0.37 maybe percent. So therefore, what we have right now, quite frankly, even though it may be wearing out, is more than adequate for now. And I don't see any reason, if on a new plant, to go scale that way up, because that assumes that we're going to bring more people in to pay for it. And obviously, if those people don't come in, we don't get that revenue, we're not going to be able to pay for it. I mean, that's just a simple fact of life. I think we need to look a lot harder at the tertiary aspect of this. I believe the gentleman here said that we're not making much money off the alfalfa, and frankly, we're losing, according to our budget, something in the order of $25,000 to $30,000 a year. That doesn't even include the capital equipment of $200,000 we spent last year to buy new equipment. So right now our recycle is costing us, frankly, a lot of money. We need to figure out how the tertiary thing is going to work. My feeling is if we can get a 35% grant, we really owe it to the rest of the citizens in the valley to use that water wisely. And I know that was pointed out up here, but I'm suggesting that we actually do it, not just talk about it. There's too many times we talk and talk and talk, and we really need to figure out how we're going to use that. If we can get a 1% loan, that's like almost giving it to us. We ought to try real hard to figure out how we're going to get that done. And that needs to be done up front. We can't wait until after we pick a site, figure out everything else, and then say, oh, it'd be nice. No, my feeling is we need to do that up front. We need to figure out how to fund it. Another thing that bothers me is the Navy commitment. If we're going to spend $45 to $50 million, a third of the current waste that is treated is for the Navy. About 33%, 30 to 33%. I think it varies in between there. My feeling is we need to have a commitment from the Navy for a third of that. There's no reason for the city to take out the liability of a bond to build something that is going to exclusively be used by the Navy. And I think we really need to figure out if the Navy is going to join in a joint project with us or not. And I haven't heard anything from the Navy, or haven't heard anything about anything indicated that the Navy is willing to put up their share of that money. So I really think we need to force that issue and find out, is the Navy willing to do it or not? And if not, we need to figure out how do we go without the Navy. I would agree that it should be cheaper for the two of us to do it jointly. However, if the Navy's not willing to pay for their share, then obviously it's not cheaper for us to do it jointly, and it would be cheaper for us to do it by ourselves.
Stan, can I ask a question?
Sure.
I can do this because we're not under the same normal constraints. We can talk back and forth, right?
Yes. it's a
Okay.
workshop.
Because the Navy, we talked about them being a customer as opposed to a partner. Do you see a dichotomy there when you say that the Navy should be a customer and a partner?
I don't think the Navy should be a customer at all. My feeling is if they want to partner with us, then they should partner with us. And if they're not going to partner with us, we should go off on our own. We don't need customers.
Well, that's what I'm asking.
It's not
I
the
want your
city's
advice.
job to provide sewer waste treatment for the Navy. Now, I'll be the first one to agree, this gentleman is absolutely right. It ought to be cheaper for everybody. I mean, the bottom line is the economies of large scale should say that it would save us money. But if right off the bat we take the liability of a bond, and if their use goes down by 10 or 20% 5 years from now, that means their costs will go down. Our costs stay the same. We have to pay off that bond no matter what. If the Navy wants to be a partner, then the liability for a third of the bond ought to be on the back of the Navy. We flat don't need customers. What we want is a partner who's willing to pay their fair share. So,
and then you're saying, and then they don't pay a rate going forward. They get the service for free. Is that?
well, no. What I'm saying is, if a BRAC happens and they lose 500 people, their amount of sewage that they have to treat goes down. Or God forbid they leave altogether, which I don't think will happen.
I'm saying
we are still left with the bond.
So if they partner with us in the terms of construction, are you suggesting that they also pay a rate for their processing of the waste? Or, I mean.
Well, the costs are divided two areas. There's the capital costs of building it, and then there is the O&M costs for operating and maintenance. All right? What I'm saying is I believe the $50 million is just the capital building cost. Is that correct? All right. So that's separate and distinct from right now the only thing we're paying is operation and maintenance costs because the facility is already paid for. So now we're talking about two different kinds of costs as opposed to the current O&M costs.
I think I see what you're saying.
Okay? But in any event, there's absolutely no reason for the ratepayers of our town to be taking on the liability of basically the Navy's capital equipment. And by the way, while we're on that particular subject, I'd like to point out that $6 million increase that we're talking about between the Navy site and the city site, the majority of that $5.5 or $6 million is strictly the cost of pumping Navy sewage down to the city plant. So therefore, if we weren't partnering, that would go away.
I don't think that's totally true because part of the town has to be pumped to the city plant.
There would, in fact, that was one of the questions that I asked and the questions that I had sent in earlier is when we had the plant going originally, we had a pump site up behind the Pizza Hut that would take our sewage and put it into the line that goes south and then back into our sewer plant. So I'm assuming that we would have put that back in operation. In fact, I had asked for some information on how that would happen and how much that would cost. I didn't get an answer to that question. In fact, there were several questions that I asked that I think were not answered. There were a few that were. One of the other questions that I had asked was, what would be the cost of the city alone doing a site? All right. That way, if we knew that, then we could compare that cost with the cost of if we were to partner with the Navy and see how much we save. We should, as the gentleman pointed out, we should be saving money by partnering with the Navy. Partner, all right? Not a customer. We don't need customers. If they don't want to partner, so be it. We can do it on our own. We're better off, or should be better off, partnering. But the ratepayers in this town should not take on the liability of a bond that the only purpose of it being to address the Navy sewer capacity issues.
Do you think that's a fair statement, Stan, that the only cost is to take care of the Navy's needs for that bond?
33% of that bond,
I
yes.
understand the 33%,
that's what I
but
meant,
you
yeah.
said take on the cost so we can
33% of the wastewater that is treated is there because of the Navy. So, yeah, it's a straight proportionality.
Right, but you said take on the bond because we were doing the navies, and you're taking on 30.
We should take on 2/3. That is,
Right.
if 2/3 of
That's
it
what you're saying.
is because of us, we should take on 2/3. And if 1/3 of it is being done for the Navy, then they should take on the other third. I mean, that's totally fair in my mind. I don't see.
Okay, well, I know, but that isn't what I thought you said initially.
Oh, I'm
was-
sorry.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to clarify it.
Okay, well, that's what I meant.
Okay, thank you. Well, I understand what you're saying now, okay.
I think I
The,
see what you're saying, Stan. I think I disagree with you, though, because if they were to pay for 33%, a third of the construction and the actual plant, we would have to calculate their service rates dramatically different than we calculate everybody else's.
No,
They would
well,
have to get a huge
if
cut
we-
compared to everyone else.
Jim, if we can't find a cost person who can differentiate between paying off the cost of a loan
No, I know,
and the
I know.
O&M cost.
I'm just saying this is the
rate-
implication of
you're
what you're
right.
saying.
If what you mean is we should only be charging them the O&M costs, you're absolutely correct.
Right. So like all of us, we pay the rate with O&M costs plus financing of the
We
debt
pay,
and things
right,
like that.
we actually
that
pay
go towards building
two
it.
things.
Yeah.
We will be paying O&M costs and bond payoff costs. So we get two charges.
Yeah, I understand. I understand
the
that.
Navy gets only one charge. No, you wouldn't expect them to help pay off part of the 2/3 that we're paying. But they're the only.
You're just talking about carving out the money differently
I'm
to begin
only
with.
talking about the capital
I think we're clear.
equipment cost.
Yeah.
We're not talking about the O&M costs at all.
Gotcha.
But they're also furnishing the land, which in a construction project, that's a value also.
We already own property. It's Navy land, BLM. Mike, that's our land. That is our land.
Well-
We all pay taxes.
But it could also be sold if we weren't using it.
No,
Well, you're
BLM is
talking
not
about-
going to
you're talking
sell
about
the
that
land.
is it's our land, but it's owned by the government.
Well,
But the land, if we used our own site, if we didn't use our own site, we could excess that land and possibly sell it to provide some money also.
if that's what you think, the land is the land. It's BLM land. It belongs to us. The Navy.
That's what Bundy thought in Oregon.
Well,
That didn't work out too good for him.
no. Well, actually, I'm not a bit sorry for him, to tell you the truth. Two different issues. I hope you're not confusing
I understand what
those
you're.
issues,
I understand
right?
what you're saying.
All right.
All government land is owned
Yeah,
by the people.
Yeah, we could use our own land. All right, we own land, not a big deal. And if the Navy wants to provide that land, I think that's great, and we'll see that the easement comes through. That obviously is important, but I don't see why the ratepayers should be paying off their part of the bond. Let me go on, because I'm already taking more time than I should. We need to clarify the loan issues very quickly. We've known about this for over a year, and apparently there's a new loan that actually looks very desirable, but it may also have stipulations on it, and we really need to find out if there are stipulations or limitations on that bond as well. I guess my feeling is at this point in time, there's still a lot of issues up in the air. One being why we're designing for a capacity we don't need. The second one, and by the way, that will push on us a lot of cost that we're not going to be able to pay for if we don't get the people moving into town to pay for it.
Now, excuse me just a second. The 1.8% growth was based on Kerncog, is that correct?
Yeah, it was.
Which I do have to agree with Stan that I think I remember 30 years ago, we were talking about 100,000 people in this valley, and we're not any bigger now than we were 30 years ago.
Yeah.
So I don't
We're
really
smaller.
see.
Well, we're smaller than we were in 1990. But according to the data provided in the report, we basically have 1,000 new families in town since 2010. That is about 2,500 people, according to his data, are in our town. Now, at 2.5 people per family, which is about the average which they're using, I don't know how good it is, that means there have been 1,000 homes built in the last 5 years.
We know there
Now,
weren't.
those people, frankly, are living on the streets
Well, actually,
if they're in this town.
in 2010, there were a lot of vacancies in town.
There were some vacancies, but there's been some houses burnt down. I think the MLS had about 250 houses on the MLS, the multiple listing.
In 2010?
Yeah, and
It's
we're
got
down.
54 now. It's got 54 today.
And it had 54. So, yeah, there were 200. Okay, 200 homes, and there have been, 50 homes built, 60 homes built in the last 5 years?
But there's also been there were also a lot of vacancies in apartments in 2010, and some people
Yeah,
live in
well,
apartments.
there-
But I understand your
Well,
concept.
Yeah. Anyway, according to Cosmont, there are 20 more people here today than there were in 2010. So, in any event, until we figure out how we're going to use the tertiary water, I think we need to be very careful about rushing in to anything. My feeling is that the new water agency that's being formed is going to put some restrictions on us. And in fact, some of them I actually agree with. I think we should be forced to use that water. One of the things that wasn't mentioned in the brief today was direct potable reuse. The state of California has gotten a number of studies going on right now that are coming to fruition this year, talking about just that, of injecting it right into the water stream, our drinking water system.
And I understand that concept, and I understand they will show you they'll drink it right out the faucet, but
There's an emotional issue.
there's a major emotional issue with the
and one thing or
population.
another, but there are cities in Southern California that are doing it right now. So I'm saying that we need to get with the times. We need to stop wasting $30,000 a year or more on our hayfield. We need to figure out how to use that, and we need to do it now. We need to figure out what we're going to do, and if there's money available for tertiary water, 35% bond and 1% interest, we've got to figure out a way to make that happen.
I agree with you, Stan, both on
Thank you.
that and on the use of the alfalfa and clearly on the numbers. I think we need to look at those numbers again, the 1.8 growth. It is good to plan for that, but the reality of it is probably low right now, I would say.
And the problem is a budget.
If we had a lot of money, it'd be different.
If they're thinking that revenue is going to increase based upon a 1.8% growth, they're assuming we're going to get a lot more revenue than we really are. And that money's not there, and it won't be there. We need to actually know how much money we really have in terms of revenue, because we can't spend any more than that. That's really all there is to it. Thank you.
Thank you. I have one question, if I could ask staff, because I obviously wasn't here when the Navy and the city first came into agreement with the use of that property. But what did that property look like when the city and the Navy first came to agreement? Did we pay anything for it? Was there a sewer plant there? What was the history of that?
Well, first of all, yes, there was a sewer plant there. It was operated by the Navy. Right now, presently, the city, we operate that plant under an operations agreement. The only agreement we have with the Navy is an agreement to operate that particular facility. Now, within that operating agreement, it refers to easements that will be given to the city so that we can actually maintain the lines and maintain the facility. So the easement actually stems from the operating agreement. But the facility you have there, with the exception of the headworks and maybe some other improvements, was primarily existed and was built and in use by the Navy prior to the city taking it over through the operating agreement.
And by that operating agreement, do we, and I'm going to put the word own that
No,
plan?
we're subject to, I believe the language is such that within X number of days, I think it's like a year and a half or so. I haven't looked at the agreement in a while, so don't quote me on that. But
Okay.
there's a period of time, and they can ask us to leave.
And leave the facility as it is?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
As I remember years ago, in the 80s, we did a lot of improvements to the sewer plant. And I believe, and maybe Tim, you know, I think the city paid for all the improvements as far as the capital costs. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know.
That's actually discussed in the operating agreement. It would, well, for everybody to see, I couldn't do it, but I could get you a copy of the operating agreement in walking distance to my desk and coming back, and I think it's only like 3 pages. I could read significant excerpts from it if you want.
I just know we did a lot of upgrades back in the 80s, back when the city actually had money. I think it was all on us, but I could be wrong.
If you could get us and email us and have it available on the website.
The operating agreement?
Yeah, that
Sure,
way
sure.
everybody could look at it. I don't want
It's
you
a
to run
it's a
up.
public document, so I
Yeah.
can do that, yes.
I know. I mean, getting it on the website is the, yeah. Okay. Sir?
I can respond to maybe a few of Mr. Ratora's comments if you want me to at this
Please.
time. Okay. First of all, this is kind of an easy one. The direct potable reuse is not really being practiced in California. We're not there yet. It's being practiced on an indirect basis, but not on a direct basis. I think that's way ahead of the curve for the city of Ridgecrest. That's kind of the easy one. On the question of capacity, population growth, and what the capacity of the plant should be, as you saw in an earlier slide, the city of Ridgecrest has had ups and it has had downs. It's had periods of rapid growth. It's had periods of flat growth. It's had periods of decline. From a engineering perspective, we have a responsibility to do things conservatively because we don't want to build a plant that where you run out of capacity in 8 or 9 years. We want to build you a plant that'll last for a long time in the future, so you don't have to go through this process again. We can argue all day long about what the growth rate should be. We used a standard that was that was developed by an outside agency. We can make the plant capacity whatever you want to make the plant capacity at. But if the differences are small in capacity, say the new numbers show it to be only needing 3.3 MGD instead of 3.6 MGD, well, in theory, that will save you some money, but it won't save you as much money as you think. It would not be a proportionate decrease in the cost of the project. That capacity, that incremental capacity from, say, 3 to 3.6 MGD is the cheapest capacity you will ever get. And in fact, there are many components of the wastewater plant that will not be affected by a reduction in flow rate or a recalibration of the population growth rate and so forth. For example, the headworks would not change at all because it's being designed for the future. The headworks will be designed for the ultimate capacity of the plant. So there's no impact there if you scale down the capacity a little bit. There's most of the pipelines and hydraulic structures, there'd be absolutely no change in capacity. Many components fall into a range. I doubt that the clarifier would reduce in capacity. The aeration basin probably would. We can go through this line by line, but I think the result would be that you might save a couple $1 million on a $44 million plant, and that's giving up the cheapest capacity you would get.
Understand.
So keep that in mind. We are circulating and have circulated the EIR at an assumed capacity because the EIR needs to evaluate the impacts at a certain capacity point. And we do have that 3.6 and 4.0 number out there right now. Things can change, but we can walk it back a little bit. But I'm not familiar with Cosmont. What is Cosmont?
There are local retail
Consulting firm.
consultants. They tell us how many people we've got buying various things, who's buying from what areas. So they keep on a probably a month-to-month basis exactly how many people there are in the valley that can buy stuff. So people are very critical to them.
Right. I was not familiar with that particular source of data. We also look at the Department of Finance, which makes periodic upgrades and or updates on your population figures. And the State Water Resources Control Board, the funders of the Clean Water Grant, would probably look to the Department of Finance for population information. The rate structure that was put into place several years ago provides enough money to support the plant and the operating revenues that we have shown, and that does not assume any additional revenue from new growth. So any new...
That's just based on what's here right now.
Yeah, so what's here right now supports it. So if you get new growth and new businesses in town, that'll just relieve the pressure on the existing ratepayers. So there is enough money to pay for the plant.
So they're not assuming new families coming in are going to pay the same cost as everybody else.
Everybody who comes in will pay the same cost as the people that are here. That'll just make your bottom line.
Excess.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
They didn't make any assumption regarding new payers in the out years.
Yeah. No, that would just be to the better. Yeah. So the liability, I think you need to look at that issue of what happens if the Navy scales back considerably on their flow. I think that's an excellent point in terms of who holds the bag if that happens.
I think they've already scaled back quite a bit, right? Isn't the reduction on the base more than what the city's been scaling back? As far as water use goes, which affects the flow into... So.
Yeah, we'll continue to try to be more conservative with our water use, but I don't see us making any huge, substantial gains over what we've achieved in the last 5 or 6 years.
You pretty well hit the maximum at this point.
We spent $6 million on water conservation projects so far.
But they can't control BRAC. BRAC
Well-
uses their personnel.
BRAC can go either way, but yeah.
Exactly.
Let me ask a question. How many other people wish to speak? Sam, Chip? We've had somebody who has to leave at 4 o'clock. So it's not that I want to cut anybody off, but I do want to make sure we get as many of the comments in. And if you want to continue to answer, go ahead. But we do have to.
Okay, I'll try to get to it quickly so that the others can speak here. The question, Mr. Rotora, why are we designing for capacity, for population growth that may not be achieved? Well, I think one answer to that might be that the worst thing that happens is that rather than having to upgrade the plant or expand the capacity of the plant in 2030, you don't have to do it till 2035 or 2034 or something like that.
Or ever.
Or whatever it happens to be. There's nothing that forces you to upgrade that plant until the need is there. So, again, our profession is kind of conservative. We don't want to be caught short in capacity. We'd rather be a little bit on the long side of capacity. And as long as we're reaching into our pockets and trying to upgrade the plant, it's my recommendation that you get as much plant as you can afford right now.
So we may never have to do phase 2, which is the $12 million.
That would be wonderful if you never
Of
had
course,
to
that
do
$12 million is in today's dollars, right?
That's correct.
So 20 years from now, it's going to be probably a lot more than that.
Is it
And
fair?
I do agree with Mr. Rotora on the tertiary. I mean, part of the reason for this workshop here is to say, let's figure out a way to do it because it's a good thing. It's beneficial to the people, but we got a little bit of work to do to prove out the customers, prove out the costs, prove out, and get that thing rolling. But before you can go to tertiary, you got to have a decent secondary plant. So that's your big, we want to get that out in front of all of this.
Well, plus, if we run the, purple line?
Yeah,
That you
purple line.
proposed, which I think would be a good idea, but we're going to have easements from the base to run that purple line through the base back to the city property.
That is correct.
And I don't know, Tim, what's the chances of getting an easement from the base to run that purple line through it? It can be done?
Yes, it's a process. Takes a while.
Just typical government process.
And we really won't have the water available. We don't turn the key on the plant until 2020. So we got, got some time
Got some time to do that.
to develop the project. And the
Okay.
tertiary part of the project actually could be implemented faster than the secondary because it's a lot less costly and a lot less moving step.
Okay.
But I'll step down for now so we hear some other comments from others.
Sam?
Thanks, Peggy. My name is Sophia Merrick. I do have some questions. I have to leave very soon. In fact, I should have left 10 minutes ago. But I think it's important that the City Council and the members of the public that understand what the BLM calls fee lands, F-E-E lands. Part of the lands that the Navy is on is actually on a lease, and some of the lands are permanent. And so I think it's important that the City Council really understand those definitions. I also think that I agree with Stan on a lot of the things he says. He understands a lot more about the actual costs than I do. But one of the things I think that cities should be looking at, whether this should be a joint EIS, EIR. And the reason why I say that, it kind of locks the Navy into more of a partnership, and it also puts them as the lead agency along with the city. The city and the Navy could be lead agencies. The BLM, Lahontan, and all that could be cooperating agencies. And it actually conserves costs. You know, you could pick like alternative 1 being the Navy land, alternative 2 being the city land, and of course there's, with an EIS, EIR, there would be a third alternative, which is no action. And of course none of us want that, but you always have to have that in place. I also think that I wrote some scrambling notes. But there are also some other grants that you should be looking at. The city of Ridgecrest belongs to the Inyo-Mono IRWIP. And it's a board that is oftentimes very good at getting grants. And there are grants available. I was just up in Bishop at an IRWIP meeting. The lady will be in town in March. I tried to set up an appointment with Peggy a month or so ago, but her schedule was full. So I think that it would be nice to meet with that lady. She could talk about what possibilities there are in regards to some other grants that you may not be coming up right now. But also another thing, too, I have some concern about under Title 22. There's some new laws that were passed just recently by the state of California, and we can't divorce ourselves from that. We have to comply to that. And there's some personal byproducts, bath products, beads and all that, macro beads, that are going to be tied up in the health and safety. And I hope the EIR, whatever it is, addresses that situation. And please add me to your mailing list. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Chip?
I'm really surprised, Chip, that you have an opinion.
I thought we were going to finish this. I didn't know you'd still be talking about it now. I'll be snappy too. That broadband committee started at 3:30, so I'm late. Terry answered a lot of questions I had that kind of, believe it or not, agreed with Stan a little bit. On the Navy cost issue, though, maybe a hybrid concept would be, I think it makes a lot of sense to have the Navy share 30% of the capital cost and the burden of the bonding. And maybe a part of that concept could be that they also share in the repayment. So as we take in fees, we repay their 30% portion of the capital cost. So we're not really just dumping the 30% burden on them and walking away. We share, we're in essence partners, but at least we don't have to finance, what's that, 15 million, 20 million? And I don't know if they get a better rate or worse rate than us, but I absolutely love the concept of the SRF because I still don't think that tax exempt bond situation has been resolved.
It hasn't.
Absolutely agree with everybody on the growth projections. But I also think you're probably right. It's like you can buy a nice SUV for about $45,000 base price, and you throw a few bells and whistles on, you might bump it up $5,000, but that base price is probably pretty close to where we're at. So we might not be. It's not going to be as dramatic an effect to lower the flow rate to get a little bit of a lower cost. I was curious. From what I remember, on all the wells that the city owns, we don't have any meters on our wells, do we?
Just one, Pearson Park.
I think going forward, it'd probably be worth getting some meters on those wells, because if we come back to start doing some cost analysis on tertiary treatment and the likes, it'd be nice to know exactly how much groundwater we're pumping out of those wells, and I would start doing that now so we've got some data to look back on, and then we'll get a true cost-benefit analysis, I would think, in the future.
We talked about that in the ad hoc water committee. Apparently, they can get really accurate estimates just off of the electricity use on the pumps.
That's
So,
good to know too.
Yeah.
But I think that data is going to be really important when we start trying to decide whether to spend $10 million on a tertiary plant. I don't think this is a question you can answer, but the council needs to try to figure out, how can we got a tremendously positive interest rate right now that probably will stay positive for at least 6 more months, I would think. But this project's going to last 5 to 6 more years. So I wonder if there's a way we can lock in the interest rate, even though we might not necessarily spend the money right away. And where does that balance out? The other question, I thought when we did the rate study and the rate adjustment, I thought we were already at close to $2 million a year in operation cost on the plant. And I thought you said in your projections we were at $900,000 a year. So I hope we can clarify that number, because it sure seems to me like one of the reasons we had to do a rate increase is because we weren't even keeping up the pace on operations and maintenance with the existing rates at the time. So, and I want to say 2.1 million, but I've slept a few times since those meetings. Gary, you and I don't think there's anybody else here with any corporate knowledge of all the investment and effort the city of Ridgecrest put in with Globe Protect. Globe Protect has a macro technology that was developed on China Lake that the city invested in as a company. The founder died. They have an obligation based on the agreement, because we incubated them for several years and invested close to $300,000 in their technology. We never got anywhere because it was the double-edged sword of they had to be EPA certified before we could put it on the plant and so forth. But the test site still exists right there behind Desert Valley's Federal Credit Union, where there's none of the technology there, but the test site exists. We've stayed, I think the last time Gary and I spoke to Globe Protect was probably maybe about a year ago, because I've been gone, maybe even longer than that. But they have moved forward. They're still in existence. and the only reason I bring it up, they probably won't be able to help us any on the basic plant, but on the tertiary treatment end, their technologies, if they have evolved to the point I think they may have evolved now, could do what we want to do at a lot lower cost than $10 million. So I would hope that we reopen that, and I'll help you guys I'll try to personally get in touch with those folks, and at least we have a conversation with them, because the package plants that they used at the time were valued at $250,000, and I think we were entitled to 2 of them. So that's something to look at from the recycled water standpoint, and maybe other things with new technology going forward. And on that vein, Dennis, I know I've been looking at all kind of different technologies. I sent you to look at a technology that involved earthworms.
That was explored.
Yeah, and you said that could be a component of this. So I know, from what I understand, we're not at that point yet, but I hope when we get close to the actual awarding of a contract that we're still trying to look at the latest and greatest technologies and see how we can incorporate them into our design. Is that still possible? And we also, from that, in that same vein, the next step is, do we pick a Carollo or a PERC or one of these other companies to actually design and build, right? We're not even near that point yet, are we?
No, this is traditional design now. This isn't a design-build project. This is design, bid, build.
Okay. When we get to that process, I hope we possibly think about design, build, operate, too. Because it's my understanding, unless something's changed, we've had a hard time staffing the wastewater plant for the 16 years I was on council. I think we're in a labor agreement that hasn't been settled, unless you guys did something I haven't heard anything about publicly. But we're in a labor dispute with that union that still involves wastewater treatment plant operators, that puts a burden on other city employees. And I just think going forward, that's an industry that's going to be tougher and tougher to staff. So a design, build, operate contract may be something to at least look at. And I think our current wastewater treatment plant manager is probably getting close to retirement by the time this new plant goes into play. And I was real excited when you said the current rates would pay the capital cost. But I'm going on memory here, but we haven't even touched on or addressed the collection system. And I thought that was about another $50 million or something to get the collection system up to speed, or at least a significant amount of money more than the $44 million. Is that correct?
We have a consultant that's developing the work plan completely with schedule and cost, yes.
So I think we need to be really cautious to start putting out there in the public. I don't think the paper's there anymore, that maybe just to get this plant, we don't have to raise the rates anymore, because I think if you're going to start addressing the collection system, the rate increases may still need to be thought about going forward at a much smaller pace, so future councils don't have to do what we had to do when it was ignored for 20 years. And with that, I think that's all I have. I got to take off. I don't want to be rude, but I'm supposed to be at broadband committee at 3:30, and you guys are expecting.
You need to go. You need to go.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chip.
I'll be brief due to the lateness of the day. Earl Wilson is my name. I live in Lone Pine, but I'm down here on other things occasionally. On meters, which I just heard, that is somewhat of a misconception about the power company being able to tell you within an accurate range. If you like plus or minus 5%, that's good. Technology is available to go to 1 to 2. They don't use it. It's expensive. You have to maintain it sometimes. They don't like to do that because the pump is off. Okay, on to why I actually came up here. A lot of people do have a misconception about the Navy owning the base. That needs to be clarified. They are a landholder, only in the sense that the government allows them to hold the land. They would like to have it in perpetuity, but I don't know that they will. They are the regulator of those lands, and they are allowed to sublet. So any misconceptions should be avoided about the city owning the land out there. They only have a right-of-way type of agreement, and I think Dennis will agree with that. The other item that I didn't hear mentioned here is liability with the city for the property out there in case it is eventually decommissioned. Who will do the cleanup and the dismantling of it? And I would recommend, not being a citizen of Ridgecrest, that you look into that closely. Thank you.
Thanks, Earl. Anybody, any other comments? Okay, did you want to continue to answer some?
Unfortunately, I guess Chip's already gone out the door, but I just wanted to respond to a couple things on issues that he raised. He is correct, looking at Hawksley's memo here. The O&M portion that I had in my slide was $900,000. It's really about twice that, but it's labeled as, that's the operations part of it. It's the wastewater administration is the other half of that. So
there's also a transfer that's several $100,000. I don't know if it's on your paper now, but if you look at the budget, there are a number of line items with administration being on top and transfers being on the bottom, and the transfers could be $200,000 to $500,000.
So it's all accommodated in this study here. And then there is money that's in the rate increase that went back a couple of years ago for collection system maintenance, and that is incorporated. So we are collecting money to help fix the collection system as well. So I think we're in pretty solid ground on the rate increase. And if you have any specific questions on that, we can get Mark to answer that. But the scenarios did include collection system capital cost improvements and the full almost $2 million for maintenance. And then the additional $500,000, $600,000 when the plant comes on kicks in 2020 and beyond. So we have a few years of grace period. And there is money that's being collected now that can offset some of the overall bond and loan costs. Okay. Sophia, I think her name was, talked about looking on other grants. I mean, we're welcome to look at wherever we can get money to help out the city of Ridgecrest. That's kind of an obvious thing here. As far as the land is concerned, my understanding is that the way the easement is written, it's the United States of America that would be granting the city the easement, and it's through the Secretary of Defense. I don't think, and we can get somebody else's opinion, your city attorney's opinion on this, but it probably doesn't matter whether it's ultimately the Bureau of Land Management or the Navy or some other agency that ultimately takes over the land. So I don't think that's I think that's a solvable issue. In terms of partnership between the Navy and the city of Ridgecrest, that's sort of beyond the scope of what we looked at. We assumed from the very beginning that this was that the existing arrangement, which was the city was sort of an indirect partner with the Navy, but that the Navy's costs or the cost for the Navy's facilities are recovered through your rate system, and that's how we implemented the rates. So that the Navy pays their full share of capital and operating costs through their rate. There may be an issue about what happens if the Navy disappears or that money goes away. That should be looked at. I think maybe it sounds like perhaps a further discussion about capacity is in order, or are we okay with the responses that we've had so far on that?
My concern about the, if we cut back the capacity, let's go to your, what page was the map on that showed you proposing?
The actual layout of the...
Yes. Oh, here it is on page 18.
Page 15, yes.
So you show,
Let's see if I can get it here.
wasn't that it?
That one there?
Yeah, isn't that the proposal?
Yes.
The left side there?
Yes.
So you've got, what were the long oblong?
The long oblong racetrack are the oxidation ditches.
Okay. And I don't know what the capacity of each of those are, but you'd have to cut the capacity quite a bit to be from 3 to 2. Is that correct?
Right. Each of those is a 1.8 MGD module, if you will.
Okay, so
But they can be cut.
and the third of each of the circle and the oblong are in phase 2. Is that correct? So we'd have 2 of each in phase 1.
Yes.
So if each are 1.8, you kind of have to have a second one. You might be able to make them smaller, but
I mean, these are all custom designed, so they can be whatever size you want them to be. But
page 18, the drawing there on the top of page 18 shows the layout of the proposed layout of the new plant.
the one that's up on the screen right now is the Navy side.
That's the Navy site. That's the Navy site, because that's right next. That's right west of the existing
Yes.
Navy site.
Correct.
So I don't agree with the growth figures that use that. I understand they are kern cogs, but I don't agree with that we're going to grow like that. But I don't see that we're going to save a lot of money cutting that back anything, because if we only have one, it's not big enough. If we have 2, it's a little bit big. But if we shrink it down, is it really going to save any money?
I think you can, in theory, save a little bit of money, but
Not enough
in
to-
reality, I'm not sure. You're taking away the cheapest part of your additional capacity.
Yeah. So I don't see any benefit in rearranging that.
Okay, is there any other council comment, Jim?
I got one. The new, and I'm glad we got this graphic up here. The new plant, does that include replacing everything, or are we keeping the headworks, or what are we keeping in that plan?
Very little.
Very little.
Keeping the ponds.
You're keeping the ponds, you're keeping the disposal system. There's a building or a structure there that a couple of structures, office building and a metal building that houses the Vector pump. Those would probably be kept, but everything else is obsolete.
So
Does this? I'm sorry.
Oh, real quick. So I was under the assumption, and I've toured the facility, that a lot of that is fairly new. I mean, the aerobic digesters and things are really, really old, but isn't some of that worth keeping? Or?
The newest part is the headworks.
Okay.
And bear in mind that we have to keep this plant operating while we build the new plant, and that the existing headworks
Yeah, that
equipment
would be
is
important.
undersized relative to what we need for the future.
I see.
So
I
it becomes
see.
very
Yeah.
difficult, and then if you salvage it, ultimately, you're salvaging a 15-year-old piece of equipment.
Right. So to accommodate the future capacity that we're looking at, you need a new headworks anyways.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, we don't have any money figured in here to clean up the old site. Is that correct?
Well, we did have a line item, about $250,000 for demolition, but if we relocate the tank and the chlorine contact outside of where it's shown now to new land, then we wouldn't necessarily have to expend that money.
That's correct, and you'll be able to read that in the operating agreement that I'll have posted.
I thought the operating agreement, I was told the operating agreement stated that when we revert it back to the Navy, it has to be cleaned up.
No, what it says is we have to return it in the same condition as we found it, and we took over their facility.
Oh, okay.
You're not reverting any of that land back to the Navy. You're still,
That's true, too.
all that's going to be within your easement anyway.
Okay, so we're still keeping all the land, so we don't have to,
Yeah, I mean, it's,
we don't have to return to the Navy in the condition it was 50 years ago when we got it.
yeah, you're not reverting any of
Okay. Well, some of it's pretty bad, Stan.
Okay, we've got 5 more minutes.
Okay, quickly, I just wanted to address Sophia's comment about doing a joint EIR-EIS. We met with the Navy, I think, 2 years ago or a year and a half ago at the beginning of our environmental process. And the only federal action that they technically have is the lease of the land. So at that point in time, the decision was made to not do a joint EIR-EIS because the process of the federal action for the lease of the land is a much less level of environmental documentation. Although the alternatives that Sophia described will be covered in your EIR. So we have alternative 1 being the Navy site, alternative 2 being the city site, and then we also have a no project alternative. So just wanted to clarify that. We will be covering those options in the secret document.
I think she made the allegation that there was some sort of lock on the Navy if we did it with the EIR-EIS. Does that, I mean, EIS, is that true?
No, there's still a responsible agency under
Okay.
CEQA because they do still have to take some sort of action to facilitate the project. But I don't think the environmental document would lock them into anything different than their approach now.
Okay, thank you.
I think the words that she said was partner, it would somehow, and I didn't understand it either, quite frankly, but somehow force the partner relationship so that they actually did have to partner with us. My question is, the easement that we are now negotiating with the Navy, does that go through phase 2 so that there won't have to be another negotiation?
Yeah, because it's all on the same land. It's all on the inside the red boundary.
Okay, so we don't have to go back 10 or 15 years from now and renegotiate anything?
Gives the city use of that land for 50 years.
For 50 years?
Yes.
Okay, and what happens if we put a new facility that as we expand 20 years from now, and at that point in time, it's only got 30 years left, but we want the life of whatever we expand to. I mean,
It would have to be
50 years is not a long time.
We have the options to renegotiate. Is there, extend it? Is that?
Yes.
Does that be written in the?
So 30 years from now, you're doing something, you want the term of the easement extended another 50 years instead of, going out that entire 50-year term, then basically you go through an action kind of like we're doing right now to renew the easement.
So in other words, we can't put anything on there that's going to last 50 years, which of course we hope the plant will do, right? Without going through another negotiation. Okay. Thank you.
I know I, for one, will not be here in 50 years.
Well, we won't, but the people who have to spend money on fixing the problems we caused,
They might.
they will.
Where are we next? What is our next action, Dennis?
Well, I think it's kind of identified on one of the last pages, but completing the EIR is probably most important right now. Then we have, Terry mentioned that we, and including me, will be meeting with Lawton in about 2 weeks, second week in February, I think it is. And I think on page 32, it kind of outlines the schedule.
Right.
Well, I would propose that we proceed as soon as possible on looking at this SRF funding.
The finding.
Well, that's dependent on completing the EIR. as
We
I
can't do
understand
that
it.
until the IR is
Well,
finished.
we can submit the general application. It just puts us on the list, but they take and process the loan. We can submit the initial paperwork on the clean water grant, but they don't. They need all the packages, the technical package, the financial package, and the environmental package before they can move it forward. So you got a little foot in the door, but but they're not going to process it until you get those.
Okay.
Does that get anything for us doing it? It doesn't lock anything in. Why would we then want to do it twice?
To be put on the list, right?
You
that
get,
all
you
it
get on the
is?
list. And,
Okay.
and by the way, this is a low, I mean, if it turns out that something better comes along, you just spend a few dollars doing some paperwork, so.
Do you need direction, Dennis, for us to ask you to go ahead and do that, or?
Oh, well, you've already
already done
approved
that?
the
Okay.
application to
All right.
for the state revolving fund.
Yeah, there's a resolution that I think was done back in December, was it?
Yes.
That authorized city manager Dennis Spear to sign the applications and.
I think I already signed it, Terry.
Right.
Okay. That's one thing I agree with Stan. It'd be nice to get the financing in place as cheaply as possible, as soon as possible. So.
Okay, is there any other action? Comments? Ellen, I'm just going to say we've adjourned then. Thank you. We don't need a motion as a workshop. Thank you all.